Thank
post it, get some people in here, and a lot going on, and your gladio glasses are coming in real handy right now.
Yep. All right, chapter 16, Rogue Elephant to Resurrection. The Watergate investigation affected Bill Colby far more than he expected. The Watergate revelations of the CIA's aid to White House domestic political operations stripped away much of the Cold War mystique around the agency. Congress was a major element illustrating the dissatisfaction with the CIA, and they were propelled not only by the revulsion at CIA domestic involvement, but by growing fears concerning the general quality of intelligence oversight and concern over the disingenuous handling by the administration of explanations for the U.S. involvement in Laos and Chile that was revealed during the Watergate investigation. Colby became the director of Central Intelligence just in time to deal with all of this. And in some of the other books that I've read, it makes it sound like he was almost going to be the fall guy as a result of that. Um, and he felt somewhat miffed by that, which is why more came out than what would have normally came out. The agency was in the midst of a secret war in Iraq by this time, and would be dispatched on another adventure in Africa during the very height of this congressional investigation. Colby and his successor would be forced to rein in the American secret warriors to the best of their ability, although the paramilitary capability was in fact resurrected. The political controversy ushered in a decade of turmoil for the CIA. A simple telephone call triggered the tempest. The call on December 18th, 1974, was to Colby from journalist Seymour Hersh, who worked for the New York Times at this time. Hersh was a noted investigative reporter who had already won a Pulitzer Prize for writing about Vietnam. Now, he told Colby, he had it from several sources that the CIA had carried out a massive intelligence operation against American opponents of the CIA that included break ins, mail intercepts, wiretapping, and surveillance. The director of Central Intelligence met with Hersh and tried to explain that the information uncovered really reflected distorted elements of several different operations and were individually within the agency's charter. In any case, Colby maintained these activities had already ceased to, and basically around 1973, there was a set of directives that made it plain that the CIA was supposed to stay within their lane. Colby insisted that Hersh's information had been blown out of proportion and was no longer relevant. Seymour Hersh did not see it that way at all. The article he wrote was splashed across 3 columns on the front page of the Sunday New York Times. The headline read, "Huge CIA operation reported in U.S. against anti-war forces, other dissidents in Nixon years." The immediate consequence of these revelations, as Colby himself concedes, was a press and political firestorm. Colby remembered these events as ruining not only the Christmas season for me, but nearly the entire next year. The problem was so great because the presidents in all the years since 1947 had avoided so successfully further legal codification of intelligence duties, responsibilities, and restrictions. The presidents preferred ambiguity because it gave them the freedom of action, plausible deniability. But each time the White House successfully avoided intelligence reforms, the pressure built a little inside of Congress until in 1974, the pot was boiling over. Bill Colby's Bill Colby's bad year had just as much to do with the White House as with the press. One critical component of the controversy concerned legislative oversight of the intelligence function. The executive branch itself once posed the issue in 1955. An intelligence study group under the Hoover Commission, mandated by President Eisenhower, had recommended creating a Congressional Joint Committee on Intelligence, similar to the joint panel that exercised oversight over the atomic energy program. Soon there was a score of bills before the Congress proposing to regulate the intelligence community, including one submitted by Senator Mike Mansfield from Montana, with no less than 34 co-sponsors. Though he initially requested the Hoover Commission's report, President Eisenhower did not agree with any of the recommendations and moved to head off the Mansfield bill. Ike's dual response was to set up a PBCFIA, which was a citizen oversight group, later known as the President's Foreign Intelligence Agency Board. And by the way, the only people that get assigned to that are the oligarchs that the CIA is operating on behalf of, just FYI. Short of an arrangement for secret subcommittees of the Congressional Armed Services Panel to approve the U.S. intelligence budgets, basically nothing was done. Previously, such approvals had been made only on an ad hoc basis by individual congressmen and senators. The Mansfield bill was defeated in the Senate by a vote of 59 to 27. 14 of the senator co-sponsors turned against him on the floor, as well as all of the members of the Armed Forces Intelligence Subcommittee. For some years afterwards, similar bills was introduced every session, only to be defeated, because we now know that the CIA has them all compromised. Despite the more formal structure, this arrangement could not be called oversight. The intelligence community had no responsibility to cooperate with the Presidential Oversight Board, which was strictly an advisory group to the president, or to keep the congressional subcommittees fully informed on intelligence activities. The Director of Central Intelligence would appear with their budgets, and the CIA would answer specific questions put to them, most of them not relevant to anything because they didn't know what to ask. Contacts were kept to a minimum where intelligence programs were concerned, as opposed to briefings on substantive questions regarding intelligence. According to the official records, in 1955 and 6, there was but a single briefing provided to the Armed Services Intelligence Subcommittee, with none at all in 1957. The average for the decade from 55 to 64 worked out to be less than 2 a year. During the months of planning for the Bay of Pigs in 1960, neither the Senate Appropriations nor the Armed Services Committees had any meetings at all with the CIA, despite the fact that they were very busy. Such briefings, and by the way, if you look at those dates, 55 to 64, there is a shitload of overthrows of governments and murdering of duly elected heads of state during that time, just FYI. Such briefings as occurred were hampered by the CIA's obsession with protecting itself using the excuse sources and methods. Real reasons were sometimes quite different. One occasion in the early 1950s, when Allen Dulles expected some hard questioning as a result of a successful Soviet penetration of one of the CIA covert operations, the Director of Central Intelligence told his assembled Covert Plans Division chiefs, "Well, I guess I'll have to fudge the truth a little." With a twinkle in his eye, Dulles said that he would admit the full truth to the subcommittee chair, quote, "that is, if he wants to know," unquote. On another occasion, Dulles commented to his assistants, quote, "I'll just tell them a few war stories," unquote. If anything, the legislatures made it easy for the intelligence officers to get away with that crap. The senior senator and congressman who made up these subcommittees appreciated their access to the secret world and so didn't want to rock the boat. The typical attitude was expressed by Republican Senator Leverett Saltonstall of Massachusetts, who once commented, quote, "It was not a question of reluctance on the part of the CIA officials to speak to us. Instead, it is a question of our reluctance to seek information and knowledge on subjects which I personally, as a member of Congress and a citizen, would rather not have." In other words, they enjoyed being ignorant didn't want to hold them accountable and do their job. By 1965, the subcommittees had expanded to include both the armed services and appropriation panels, but the CIA remained unchanged. That year, the Director of Central Intelligence refused to answer questions in testimony before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, though he stated he would answer the questions if posed by a secret subcommittee or the President's Intelligence Board. The Foreign Relations Committee chairman at the time was Senator Fulbright, a Democrat from Arkansas. He was so incensed that the CIA would provide information to private citizens that it would not dare to give to elected senators, because he didn't understand they actually work for those civilians and not the senators nor the president. Fulbright became a strong supporter of a bill offered by Senator McCarthy, calling for an investigation of the CIA by a panel of the Foreign Relations Committee. The bill was approved by the committee and went to the floor. The McCarthy bill posed a challenge to the existing minimal legislative oversight, and now Mike Mansfield was the majority leader in the Senate. Lyndon B. Johnson, as majority leader in 1956, had helped oppose Mansfield's original bill, but he was now in the White House. As majority leader, Mansfield was willing to support a compromise, but as an individual senator, the Montana Democrats stood behind the McCarthy legislation. Mansfield met the Armed Services Committee chair, Senator Richard Russell, a Democrat from Louisiana, who also headed the Intelligence Subcommittee, and with Fulbright, made it clear that if a compromise were avoided, he would back the McCarthy bill. President Johnson was advised to steer clear of the legislative issue, but LBJ, like Ike, worked behind the scenes to preserve the status quo. As early as the fall of '65, a presidential directive reaffirmed the role of the Presidential's Intelligence Advisory Board had been prepared, which McGeorge Bundy put it, "We plan to use as appropriate with congressional leaders where there is any question about our effective supervision of the Intelligence Committee." The paper was useless when the issue arose because Fulbright and others were angry. Sorry about that. Precisely because the Presidential's Intelligence Advisory Board was being given material that had been denied Congress. Interestingly enough, excuse me, I gotta sneeze. All right. Remember the guy that I was talking about yesterday, Walt Rustow, on the pond? Well, he makes an appearance. He is the National Security Council aide to McGeorge Bundy. He reported to LBJ that Fulbright was unhappy and did not understand why the Foreign Relations Committee should be denied access. And the president scrawled across the bottom of his copy of the report, "Because they leak." Far from steering clear, LBJ played an active role and backed up the strong opposition to the strong opposition of William Rayburn, who by that time was the Director of Central Intelligence. And on June 1966, Mansfield met with other principals to seek a compromise. The president, in turn, met with Mansfield and the Senate Minority Leader, Republican Everett Dirksen. The president opposed broadening the CIA's reporting to Senate. Significantly, LBJ assigned his political aide, Harry McPherson Jr., to handle the matter, not NSC advisor Rostow or the NSC staff. On intelligence, Peter Jessup. A few weeks later, Richard Helms took over as the Director of Central Intelligence. He was given advice from the White House, and basically was having communications with Bill Moyers, the same Bill Moyers that ends up being a journalist. The strategy was worked out in meetings and phone calls between McPherson and Senator Russell. They compromised in order to water down McCarthy's resolution, which lost its provisions for a staff and a budget and a report by a certain date, and became just another addition to a secret subcommittee. In response to the further letter from Fulbright, the CIA again refused to provide any information to the Foreign Relations Committee. Russell came out strongly against the bill, and when Russell and McPherson determined that they had the votes to defeat it, they resisted any attempt to table the resolution, which was defeated in a vote 61 to 28, July 1966. To pacify the proponents of the legislation, Fulbright and the ranking Republican member of his committee were then invited by Russell to sit with the secret subcommittee the following year, while the CIA went up to Capitol Hill for a detailed presentation to the Foreign Relations Committee on Laos. Eugene McCarthy later became a close friend of the CIA director, Richard Helms. They're all compromised, all of them. Following the episode, the CIA relations with Congress remained much as they were before. Meetings increased somewhat between 65 and 74. On the average, the Senate Armed Services Committee was briefed 3 times a year, the Senate Appropriations Committee 4 times a year, and the House 4 times a year. Congressional attitudes continued to be lackadaisical. The House unit held no meetings at all in 71 and 72, while in 1967, the CIA appropriation was approved by both the House and Senate after a single congressman went to Langley to observe a rehearsal of the budget presentation. The CIA continued to take advantage of this situation. In 66, Richard Helms went to Capitol Hill with his deputy director for science and technology and a collection of fancy spy gadgets to successfully deflect any discussion of issues. Similarly, Richard Helms gave the following advice to a special assistant on Vietnam affairs, George Carver, before Carver's first appearance on the Hill. Quote, "Don't waffle, don't ramble, and don't guess. When you're getting into an area you feel you can't discuss, you tell them, but you also tell them as succinctly as possible the answer to the question they ask, not the question they should have asked," unquote. It is not surprising that Richard Helms felt confidently, deliberately misleading Congress on Chile in 1973. The attitude began to change in the late period of the Nixon administration because, of course, they're going to be collusion or in on the collusion to get rid of them. Opposition to the Vietnam War led to questioning about many policies, including intelligence. The revelations of the U.S. involvement in Laos from Senator Stuart Symington and others brought another close call for the CIA. This time, the issue was war power. Attempting to lock the barn door after the Vietnam War had already started without congressional declaration. Senator Republican Jacob Javits from New York and Democrat Thomas Eagleton of Missouri, John Stennis of Mississippi introduced bipartisan legislation in 73 that was a series of proposals that would restrict the power of the president to conduct military operations without congressional approval. Earlier attempts had failed to pass in the House, but in 73, the votes were definitely there. The War Power Bill, numbered S440 in the Senate, had so many co-sponsors that passage was assured. While most of the senators focused on the aspect of regular military operations, Tom Eagleton believed that modern warfare was not just isolated to regular military operations. He was concerned that the CIA and their covert operations would be conducting basically a covert war without a declaration. Senator Eagleton offered an amendment to extend the restriction to civilian employees of the United States government, clearly targeting the CIA. Eagleton believed he could not support this provision in July 1973, a time when Fulbright's Foreign Relations Committee took the unprecedented step of rejecting Nixon's nomination of Ambassador G. McMurtry Godley for the post of Assistant Secretary of State in Far East Affairs. Godley's role in running the Laos secret war was an important factor in gathering the opposition for his new nomination. And yet again, you see a CIA operative that had been involved in clandestine covert operations being put in the ambassador ranks. At least they attempted to, because they use the ambassadors as kind of like the quarterback of the country team in which the CIA operates and does overthrows. Eagleton nevertheless met disappointment in his effort to include the CIA under the War Powers Act. As soon as the Missouri senator offered his amendment, John Stennis, now at the Armed Services Committee chair position and in charge of the CIA Subcommittee on Intelligence, asked Eagleton to withdraw it. Stennis favored restrictions on part of a comprehensive CIA charter legislation separate from the War Powers Act. Javits also opposed CIA inclusion, as did the Senate floor manager of the bill, Maine Democrat Edmund Muskie. Muskie's reading of Stennis's letter during the Senate floor debate was instrumental in the defeat of Eagleton's amendment by a vote of 53-34. This, plus a certain lack of definition in the bill, turned Eagleton from one of the original proponents into an active opponent of the legislation. The bill nonetheless passed, as did a similar measure in the House. It was vetoed by Nixon, and Congress then overrode the veto. The War Powers Act became the law, but did not restrict any covert operations, which of course is done and then triggers an actual war, as we've seen so many times. The CIA had been very lucky for a very long time. None of the more than 200 legislative measures intended to oversee or restrict their action had ever been introduced before 1974 had passed, and they had never been passed. By 1974, however, there was a lot of bad feelings in Congress on the issue. Some legislation was tentatively considered that year by the Senate Committee on Government Operations. Before anything emerged from the effort, William Colby got the aforementioned telephone call from Seymour Hersh. President Gerald Ford was en route to a skiing vacation in Vail, Colorado, when Colby called to warn him of an imminent appearance of a Hersh story on CIA domestic activity. Ford immediately asked for a report later that day, responding to a growing number of press inquiries. The president issued a public statement that said he asked Henry Kissinger, acting NSC advisor, to obtain the report from William Colby. In their discussion, William Colby had to be circumspect with the president, who was aboard Air Force One when Colby called. The two had spoken over an open line in a radio patch to the White House switchboard. William Colby's bad year got off to a rousing start on Christmas Eve. That evening, he crossed the Potomac from Langley to visit Kissinger at State. In the 2 days since Hersh's article had appeared, the Director of Central Intelligence had assembled a memorandum describing how the New York Times had exaggerated, but there were fire behind the smoke, as Colby was obliged to admit. In fact, Hersh had succeeded in uncovering some of the major CIA abuses exposed internally in a report ordered by Jim Schlesinger in response to Watergate. The CIA's Inspector General report contained 700 allegations filed by the CIA's own employees and was so sensitive it was sarcastically referred to as the family jewels. It happened that Kissinger had never been briefed on the report, which was completed during the transition, which Colby replaced Schlesinger as the Director of Central Intelligence. One can imagine the outburst Colby now endured from Kissinger. At last, William Colby proceeded with his briefing, then handed Kissinger a copy of the report. It contained allegations of CIA assassination efforts against such foreign political leaders as Castro, Diem in Vietnam, the Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo, the Dominican Republic. Kissinger flipped quickly through the various allegations, but slowed down when he came to the part about assassinations. He stopped and looked at William Colby. Well, Bill, when her story first came out, I thought you should have flatly denied it as totally wrong. But now I can see why you can't. Kissinger told Colby's 30-page report Kissinger took his report to Vail to show President Ford. There was no White House denials, and Ford made no statement in support of the CIA. There was also no denials by William Colby or official statements from the CIA. The only denial of the Hearst story came on Christmas Day from Richard Helms, a source who increasingly lacked any credibility. Colby himself wanted to save the CIA, but was not prepared to lie for it or do anything illegal. That was going to mean sitting tight for the inevitable investigations. On January 4th, 1975, Gerald Ford declared his administration would not tolerate illegal activity by intelligence agencies. He also said that he had been assured by William Colby that no such activities were in progress, which was a big fat lie, and announced formation of a commission to investigate domestic abuses under the chairmanship of who? None other than Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, one of the guys who is in the syndicate directing the CIA's abuses. Very swiftly, Congress established its own investigative committee. The Senate approved a resolution, S-21, on January 27th by a vote of 82-4, naming a select committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities. The 14-member panel was to be chaired by Frank Church. The House did a similar version with 10 members, and that was going to be called the Pike Commission, after New York Democrat Otis Pike. In his memoirs, A Time to Heal, President Gerald Ford writes, if the blame for the year of intelligence, quote unquote, should be put on investigative journalists like Seymour Hersh and the congressional committees who wanted to look at everything in the files, Ford is correct that the atmosphere created in the Watergate scandal contributed to the intensity, but the CIA abuses were hardly incidental. From the instant of his first exposure to the family jewels, President Ford's major concern was leaks. This fear is the one point he returns to repeatedly in his memoirs, and it was certainly on his mind while he was in office. In fact, the terms of reference for the Rockefeller Commission were carefully drawn in a futile effort to avoid investigations of very sensitive areas like assassinations. It was, however, an idle hope that this presidential commission could head off any congressional investigations, but that failed. Obviously, it would not be possible for the commission and the committees to investigate without collecting data, or for them to report without revealing some information. Withholding documents and witnesses or restricting testimony by officials was sure to arouse the ire of the investigators and encourage leaks. Moreover, refusals to supply information occurred in the open and were openly reported in the press without any need for investigative journalism. One of the worst examples happened when Henry Kissinger and the Pike Committee, which was forced to go to the full House of Representatives to secure subpoenas. The subpoenas were voted, but Kissinger surrendered the material only when he was about to be cited for contempt. Before the year of intelligence was over, the House voted 7 subpoenas, but the government surrendered the material for only 4 of the 7. 3 were rejected, including one addressed to Kissinger, ordering him to supply copies of all State Department recommendations to the National Security Council on covert operations since January 1961, which would have Interestingly enough, that particular date would have not included, and I believe this is actually on purpose, would not have included the Lumumba because it was done a few days before the 20th, 1961. And they did not want the fact that they boiled a man in acid to be known. So, convenient date there. The second subpoena also concerned covert actions, while the third related to intelligence reporting on strategic arms limitation agreements. Ford's opinion is that the Pike Committee was out to stick it to Kissinger. After consultation with the Attorney General, President Ford intervened on November 19, 1975, writing Otis Pike that the subpoenaed documents had been legitimately withheld. The committee responded by voting to cite Kissinger for contempt of Congress, a measure that would have gone to the full House in December, but the White House compromised by releasing some of the material. Counterattack came in early January of 76 when the White House aides told the congressional committees that they hoped to obtain intelligence material in the future as oversight panels. Staff would have to be reduced, plus stiff penalties for leaks adopted. Penalties would include expulsion from Congress. For its part, the CIA recommended numerous deletions from the Pike report for reasons of national security. A number of these were accepted, but about 150 deletions were rejected despite prior agreements guaranteeing confidentiality. The Ford administration was able to prevail upon the full House of Representatives not to release the Pike report. Some 246 representatives voted to suppress the report against 124 for its release. When television reporter Daniel Schorr, Schorr, asked for his reaction, Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill said, quote, "This is an election year, and they're getting a lot of flack about leaks, and they're going to vote their American Legion post," unquote. But counter to President Ford's wishes, the Pike report was leaked, and major portions were printed in 2 installments in a New York weekly called The Village Voice. Subsequent investigations established that over 200 copies of the report had been delivered to an assortment of congressional and executive offices at the time of the leak. No culprit was ever found, though it was discovered that the initial leak had been to Daniel Schorr. Ironically, Gerald Ford might have done better with the initial House committee leadership. The original choice for chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence had been Congressman Lucien Nedzi, Nedzi, a Democrat from Michigan. Not only was he from the president's home state, but he had chaired the Intelligence Subcommittee. Nedzi's leadership of the House investigation began to disintegrate. In fact, when it became known that the Michigan congressman had been briefed by William Colby on the portion of the Family Jewels report concerning assassination attempts, Nedzi told none of his colleagues what he had learned, and he was forced to resign to be succeeded by Pike. Isn't that irony at its finest? That's hilarious. All right. Frank Church was a liberal Democrat with presidential aspirations. Some observers believe that Church wanted to ride the intelligence investigation into national prominence. Be this as it may, the Senate investigation was conducted quietly and systematically with little fanfare, though there had been repeated, if unconfirmed, allegations that material was also withheld from the Senate side. Frank Church had been around and he knew where to look. The Idaho Democrat had been a member of the Foreign Relations Committee when the body was spurned by the CIA in 1966. He participated in the Laos hearings in 67 and 69. Church had also been chairman of the subcommittee on multinational corporations, to which Richard Helms lied about the CIA's involvement in Chile. Ambition or not, Church was determined to follow up on several of these subjects. Like the others, the Church investigation went into domestic abuses. It examined intelligence analysis, as did Pike's, and the history of the intelligence community, intelligence organizations, their budgets, but some of the best work concerned covert operations. The 900 major and several thousand minor clandestine actions that had been carried out since 1961. Now, again, let me say that again. 900 major clandestine actions and thousands of minor clandestine actions had been carried out since 1961. That's like 15 years. That's a shit ton of covert activities. The investigation was nothing if not thorough. For its interim report, the allegations of assassination plots, the church committee conducted numerous interviews, held 60 days of hearings, and accumulated over 8,000 pages of sworn testimony. Some witnesses were re-interviewed on the basis of information that was uncovered later. For its general review of covert operations, the committee got 14 CIA briefings and conducted staff interviews with 120 people, including 13 former ambassadors and a dozen CIA station chiefs. The investigations lasted past its original September 75 deadline, eventually to hold over 250 executive session hearings, plus 800 interviews, and gathered more than 110,000 pages of documentation. 60 professional staff assisted the senators with the effort. The final report was approved and released in April 1976. This report ran 6 volumes. I have skimmed over quite a bit of it, including detailed staff studies. There were 7 volumes of hearings, an interim report on assassination plots, and a case study of covert actions in Chile. 6 additional case studies on covert operations remained classified at the request of the CIA. One significant conclusion was drawn from all of this. There had been hold on. All right, there we go. There had been a oh my gosh. That's my sister. She knows not to call between 4 and 6. All right, let's see. There had been a failure to provide the necessary statutes to conduct intelligence operations within a constitutional framework. Presidents had made excessive and sometimes self-defeating use of covert operations, while inadequate legislative attention had been given to the intelligence budgets. The fundamental issue was to balance the requirements for secrecy with American democracy, except for we're not a democracy. From all of the millions of words in the hearings, findings, and recommendations of the church committee, one phrase in particular stuck out in the mind of Gerald Ford and many others who heard it. One day at the hearings, Frank Church wondered out loud whether the CIA had not become a rogue elephant. The government officials have spent years trying to live down that damning epithet. Frank Church's opinion after the investigation by his committee was the U.S. government capability for covert action should be very sharply circumcised. The majority of his colleagues were not willing to go too far. Referring to the secret warriors in comments appended to the committee report, Church noted in his conclusion, quote, "Certainly we do not need a regiment of cloak and dagger men earning their campaign ribbons and indeed their promotions by planning new exploits throughout the world. Theirs is a self-generating enterprise," unquote. With the capacity in place, pressures on the president to use it, the senators believed the pressures were immense. For this activism, Frank Church wrote, "I must lay the blame in large measure to the fantasy that it lay within our power to control other countries through the covert manipulation of their affairs. It formed part of a greater illusion that entrapped and enthralled our presidents the illusion of American omnipotence. So, we're going to stop there because it takes a transition over to Africa at this point. So it's kind of a good place to stop for the day, and we will finish this chapter tomorrow. So we will open up. Oh, what happened to all my co-hosts? They all fell out. Let me get Bridget back up here. And did SR71 go somewhere? Oh, there he is. Okay. All right, there we go. What you got? Let me look over here on Rumble. Let's see.
Colonel, I think SR71's still in here. I don't see him as co-host.
I sent him the invite. He may had to have dropped out.
Yeah, it was glitching all over the place. It threw me out right at the end.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
That happened to me Friday. That happened with one of my co-hosts Friday night. So,
well, again, I listen to people's spaces all the time. I have never had anyone have as much problems as we do. And it doesn't matter whether I'm at home, if I'm on the road, it doesn't matter if I'm on Starlink, if I'm on my normal just cell tower service, it's consistently bullshit. So anyway, whatever. I don't know if he just can't get it or what. Jose or Joseph, sorry. There was more letters.
Hi, Colonel.
Hi.
This is one of the most interesting topics, almost as interesting as when I spoke to you in the space about the JFK assassination, because I've studied about Bill Colby extensively, and also about, of course, about the church committee because of my fascination with the JFK assassination. But Bill Colby was certainly a fascinating character. He died under extremely
weird
circumstances.
Yep.
Where he was fishing. He was retired and fishing, and it was ruled a suicide. But many people, such as myself included, believe that it was because of the perceived whistleblowing that the CIA took him out.
So first of all, he wasn't fishing. His computer was open. He had a half-eaten dinner on his table. He was obviously interrupted in the middle of a meal and basically carted out of his home. The fishing story comes into play because he did fish, and supposedly they found him in the water and the boat was gone. And so it was, the story was floated that he was quote unquote fishing, but no one could explain how his computer, with his obsessive security, because they didn't have like the lockout, capability on the computer. His computer is open and not locked, and he's in the middle of eating his dinner. And, a day or so later, they find his body floating in the water. So, yeah, anyway, I agree.
He was in French Indochina in the early days of the Vietnam War, like before the war even started. His kids were partly raised in what is now Vietnam.
Yep.
And Italy, also in Italy.
For Operation Gladio.
He was deep within the CIA. And then just to switch topics to the church committee, that got a lot of people killed because they knew stuff about the JFK assassination, like such as Jimmy Hoffa, for example, Sam Giancana, people who were going to testify on the subject of assassination. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. I agree. And Bill Colby obviously was integral in the Phoenix program in Vietnam as well. which I would argue we've implemented here. All along.
I've written a screenplay on the JFK and RFK assassinations. So I just shared something up top. I wanted to. One of my desired actors is Brad Pitt to play Frank Church.
Are you trying to get people to love him?
I'm trying to, but I hear he's a Democrat. So that was Frank Church, though.
There you go. All right. All along, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to kind of echo, I guess, the previous comment about how, in my opinion, this is really a critical period. And he brings up a good point about Colby versus the CIA. And I kind of agree with skeptics of that dichotomy, because it's like we should probably be careful about saying versus the CIA, because there's possible limited hangout aspect of Colby, but there does seem to have been some pretty serious differences between Colby and the kind of Dulles, Angleton, Helms, Burma Boys core. And we should also note that I think it's significant that this is the time, when there was really the only period of legislative oversight of CIA. And, one can say, look, well, how did, the oversight turn out? It didn't work. And that's true. But I think it's something to kind of look into the actual history of these years in some detail, because we can actually see, in my opinion, the real kind of nuts and bolts engine of how the CIA works in terms of going directly to the press and eliminating real opponents of the CIA. And in particular, the key folks in the House Select Committee were just literally replaced by the CIA, going right through the Washington Post and New York Times. And of course, the best historian showing that is Catherine Olmsted at University of California, Davis. It's just an immensely important book. So I think this period of like 74 to 78 is kind of worth some micro-analysis in terms of actually seeing how the CIA works through the press to just get their enemies in Congress and make sure that the end result will be, to further enable the CIA's permeation through all aspects of U.S. society.
Right.
Good. And I'm not sure this is kind of appropriate. Well, I just wanted to say one comment, and it might be a little bit off topic, about the announcement with El Salvador today. That was kind of, look, I mean, I'm trying to be fair here, because, I kind of applaud the skepticism about USAID. And I think that's a very healthy thing. And in terms of restoring sovereignty to U.S. voters, and, from these unelected agencies that are just extensions of the CIA. And the only reason there's skepticism about that, you and I know, and most of your listeners don't, we know about the AID as an extension of CIA. But, we should note that some people don't know that, and we should ask why. And, it's, in my opinion, it's because the media has just utterly failed to do their job about journalism with CIA. And but regarding El Salvador, I mean, you know what? I think I'm going to hold off on that. But because I'm probably speaking too soon. But something that kind of disturbed me about is the possibility of U.S. prisoners going to U.S. citizens being held in Salvadoran jails. And I think we need to understand that, although this president of El Salvador is a hero among some, perhaps, that we need to understand, or maybe it's debatable, but in my opinion, without the CIA death squads in El Salvador, this guy doesn't exist. And I'm not saying that, obviously there's been a huge problem since the heyday of the death squads in the 80s, in the 1980s, in terms of, the society being turned upside down with, drug gangs. I understand that. But what caused that? What caused that? And to what extent is the CIA up in that Salvadoran government right now? And so for someone who claims to be fighting the deep state to be possibly talking about sending U.S. prisoners to imprison U.S. citizens, imprison in El Salvador, we need to, it's time for some analysis of that.
So, yeah. So let me just say this. I've not read whatever it is that you're talking about. There is going to be an entire conversation, and keep in mind the way this works. Just like with the whole Panama Canal, he throws something out, and it's like a million miles from where you want to land, and you land somewhere well short of that. But meanwhile, you've deflected all of the conversation about where you're actually going to land. This is a negotiation model that we have seen repeatedly. It normally works out well. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't do what All Along just did. Just like what we did with Panama, when he throws out all of that crazy ass bullshit about the fact that, we ever owned the Panama Canal to begin with. We didn't. That we lost 30-some thousand people. We did not. But that gives us a platform to put the real information out there. And every time we have a platform to put the real information out there, everybody else collectively gets smarter about our history. At some point, and I've said this routinely, as people have criticized the management or leadership in the continent of Africa, or the turmoil that generated the refugees or the illegal immigration from Latin America. A lot of the causality of all of that was CIA activity. Now, we know that the CIA installed Chiang Kai-shek in the Taiwanese government. You have the Taiwanese government, which for the first 40 years was not an actual functioning government absent the United States. It just was not. We were the Taiwanese government. And the Taiwanese government, along with the US, completely destroyed Latin America, along with Reverend Moon and the Moonies and the World Anti-Communist League. And we did it on behalf of US oligarchs. And so it's literally like going down there and blowing up a bunch of bombs and then saying, your life sucks, you can't come here. And if you come here, then you're going to be in trouble. And oh, by the way, if you actually run the drugs that our CIA is actually injecting into your area, and you go to their training camps, then you get your body all tattooed up with this MS-13 bullshit, and you start killing people because that's what you were trained to do by the Taiwanese political cadre school, as well as the School of Americas. Then because we've created a pariah on the rest of civilization, that you're going to spend the rest of your life in jail. Now, did they make a choice? Did everybody join MS-13? No, they did not. And yes, they did make a choice. But these are the things that we need to have a conversation about. Number one, most people don't know any of what I just told you, because that is not the history that is taught in American schools. And so we need to understand what the real history is, which is why we're here. And then we can collectively talk about solutions in an informed way and push back on the things that we disagree with. So, Matt, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel, long time no see. Bridget. So all along mentioned earlier that that period of time was the only time we saw any legislative oversight of the CIA. Could we do that again in this era? Are we capable? Is Congress capable of doing that in this era? If so, what would that look like? What would that legislative oversight look like?
So, I do not believe Congress is capable of overseeing a central intelligence agency that has no legitimacy in its existence at all and needs to be closed. Number one, they do not, and they have never done intelligence, period. They have not ever worked for the United States citizens, nor have they ever complied with the Constitution. Now, you can argue that the president signing that national security action memorandum was some form of cover for them. I think that's all bullshit. Any authority that they should have been given should have came from Congress. I think those executive orders or action memorandums are all hogwash. So if you have an entity that does not work on behalf of the American people, but suck our tax dollars to the billions and billions. I mean, literally, I did the budget. They have spent since inception over $2 trillion of our wealth going around assassinating and training people to assassinate and just destroying entire continents, not just a country, entire continents have been destroyed by their activities. So, and they did it on behalf of oligarchs wanting to install a fascist empire. So, because they have never been a central intelligence for the American people, you cannot make an argument that we can't do without their fucking intelligence because we've never gotten any. All we got was a bunch of dead bodies. Okay? So you can't make that argument. The intelligence that they write in national intelligence estimates are lies. They're lies in order to achieve an agenda and a decision that the oligarchs has instructed them to go do anyway. So, having said that, there's no reason at all to have a central intelligence agency. The Defense Intelligence Agency, which should only be used in the defense of the United States, not as an offensive attack because we don't like what your president is saying. The Defense Intelligence Agency has the capability and has, since its existence, collected intelligence around the world because the United States military operates around the world. So we already have an intelligence agency doing the job minus the covert activity. So them coupled with the National Security Agency, they have the ability to do everything that we need to have done. So I do not believe any reform of the Central Intelligence Agency needs to occur. I think, again, somebody needs to go in, turn the lights off, lock the door after all of the classified material has been gotten out, put a for sale sign, and then give us the material. That's my vote. Joseph?
Just a couple of quick questions. So what was Zbigniew Brzezinski's role in the assassination of Diem brothers? Because I heard you mentioning that.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Somebody was knocking on the door.
Oh, I was saying, what was Zbigniew Brzezinski's role in the assassination of the Diem brothers? Because I saw it in a Colby documentary that I watched. He was mentioned extensively.
So he basically played the role of national. So I don't know how often you've been here and listened to our conversations, but basically the way the hierarchy works with the CIA is their go-between between the CIA and the president is the National Security Council and the National Security Advisor. And so they basically shield the president from and give them plausible deniability, and so they will have a representative from the president's office sitting in on whether it's the 40 committee or they all had different names under each president. And Brzezinski basically was in that layer of National Security Council roles. So he basically was the figurehead, if you will, that approved and disapproved these things with the plausible deniability of the president, with his figurehead, like the military attaché for the president or advisor, whatever you want to call him, or they had special assistants for intelligence. Some of them did. Every one of them did it a little differently, but they had a no-name guy sitting on the NSC in these selective, like 5-person meeting that would basically kind of be the go-between, because they're those meetings were recorded as to who sat in on them, and they wanted them recorded because they wanted to prove the president wasn't in on the quote-unquote approval, even though we know now exclusively that they always had a go-between and they all knew what was going on. So there really isn't any plausible deniability at this point because there's been too much unearthed and too many statements made. So he basically was the guy running the show in the White House for all of those actions in Vietnam as it related to the CIA.
And then I also have a church committee question. If you've ever seen the movie, and it's also Vietnam related, Afghanistan related, Charlie Wilson's War, Feel Good Charlie, role did he play in stifling Congress from knowing about the CIA's covert activities?
So again, my take on all of this is, yes, there's going to be someone that is given that role, and they're going to be labeled that as Charlie Wilson was. But you just heard me say Congress doesn't want to know. They don't want to know. And even when they do know, they don't do shit about it. So they basically don't want to know. So there's always going to be somebody that's going, oh, he's the reason why Congress didn't know. That's all bullshit. It's just another one of those smoke and mirror bullshit stories that none of them want to know, because none of them have balls. None of them want to actually fix anything, because the majority of them are in on the take. What you're going to,
as long as the money's flowing, they're good, right?
Right. And it's flowing in many different ways. So this is the point that I keep making about USAID. To me, most of the people are missing the big story. The big story, when you look at USAID, everybody's talking about, 500,000 condoms going to one country. No, that is not the big story. The big story is who got that contract. Because whoever got that contract was not in whatever country it was. It wasn't in Syria. It wasn't in Ukraine. It wasn't in wherever. None of that matters. The condoms probably never even made it to the country. Those condoms are bought by a contract let inside the United States, generally to an American company, and they may cost 50 cents a piece. They're going to sell them to the government for $5 a piece, and that $4.50 then gets divvied up among all the players, to include the Congress. And the way that happens is, it doesn't like, I'm going to give you, a $10,000 bill. That's not the way it happens. They get, that condom company is going to have some junket over to Cyprus. And we're going to go look at XYZ at Cyprus, and we're going to invite 20 congressmen. And when we invite the 20 congressmen, it's all expense paid. You're going to get a stipends at the bar. You can drink as much as you want. That's how this whole thing works. It is not anything like what people think it is. So anyway, SR-71, go ahead, go.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank everyone for attending. Something just struck me, and let me put it this way: my stint in the military, I dealt mainly with IT. Okay, so I don't have a background in military intelligence, but you made a statement earlier that got me thinking about what's going on here. And that statement, we have CIA who's not doing intelligence, but we have military intelligence around the globe. And I'm sitting here thinking, why isn't our military intelligence calling this out? That's where I'm drawing a blank here. Maybe you can help in that regard.
What happened to General Flynn when he called it out?
Well, we know what happened to General Flynn, but
he got fired. He got fired as the head of DIA, because when he became the head of the DIA, the first question he asked was, where's all this money going? And when he found out that the DIA had been complicit in a few things they shouldn't have been doing, he got fired. And not only did he get fired, when he was going to be the national security advisor, which I just described to you how important and pivotal that role is, because they control all 17 intelligence agencies and the shit that they do, to include the CIA. It wasn't that he immediately got sidelined. He got sidelined after a meeting he had with a guy from the CIA, if you've watched his movie, that came to the National Security Advisor's office to quote unquote brief him. And when he couldn't answer any of General Flynn's questions, he was told to go back and get the answer. And that was the last time General Flynn saw a CIA person, because the FBI set him up. Which then you would argue that the people that set him up really weren't FBI. They were actually CIA posing as FBI. And that would be my assessment of the entire thing. That's what happens to people who try to call these people out. And it was illustrated to us firsthand. All along.
Yeah, Colonel, I just wanted to juxtapose what Matt said about, has there been any checking and balancing of CIA by Congress now? And your point, which I happen to agree with, that it's beyond hope as far as Congress checking and balancing CIA. I agree with you on in part on that sense, because I feel like the CIA has been so unchecked since the late 1970s, and you can see it. You can compare the Iran-Contra hearings, which there was some kind of journalism about the CIA, but it was nothing compared to the mid-70s. There was some kind of congressional checks and balances, but again, it was nothing compared to the 70s. And then the later it gets, the more Congress is just forget about it. It's beyond hope. They're utterly toothless. They're vestigial as an institution, except to deceive school children with the illusion of checks and balances. However, this is where I kind of, to some extent, think it is worth pointing, or at least asking the question, why is Congress not checking and balancing CIA?
Okay.
Not because I think that they can or that reform is possible. I agree with you that it can't. But the point is, we cannot go on teaching checks and balances as if, to 100% of the population, without directly making clear that this is an illusion. There is no checks and balances.
Right.
Why are we in effect teaching school children political alchemy, an older model of power, checks and balances that no longer exist, when we have political chemistry, because we refuse to get real about the completely unchecked and completely unbalanced of the power of the CIA? The question, I think, is worthy as a rhetorical device to point out just how much we're blinding school children with this idea that there's checks and balances when there really isn't. They should be checking and balancing according to they should be checking and balancing the CIA according to what we tell 100% of the population. If they're not, we need to point that out aggressively.
I agree. Matt, go ahead.
All along, brother. First of all, I'm not Catholic, but that was a homily. That was a homily. Yeah, I really want to echo what the Colonel said in response to my question earlier, because if this thing's not capable, if the CIA really is just a PR agency providing cover for clandestine operations, dark money, everything the Colonel talks about, then yeah, it needs to be dismantled and it needs to be cutting the lights out. It needs to have the lights cut out. And maybe some of these declassifications that are going to lead to that. Now, obviously, I don't think they're declassifying enough. I want to see 9/11 declassifications. I want to see all the various other operations that went on during the Obama years, like related to Libya and things of that nature. Declassify more if Ratcliffe can, because the more we know, the more it helps the Colonel out, and the more people are going to realize the very thing you just said. You've been saying for some time since I've known you and followed you, which is there's so much of current narratives that we're fed that are lies, and we could be seeing a pathway to it. Like I've said before, the CIA cannot keep getting away with this into perpetuity. They can only do that as long as they've got a good cover story. If they don't have that, the whole
No. They can only do it as long as we stay ignorant, and we're not going to stay ignorant. Money Penny, go ahead.
God, you said don't be ignorant, and here's a British person asking a ridiculous question. Okay, 3 questions. First one, what do the FBI think of the CIA, and how has the relationship changed over the years?
I can't answer that. I mean, I've never been in the FBI. The FBI is, to a large extent, is just as rotten as the CIA. If you go back to its origins with J. Edgar Hoover, and when it was set up, it was basically set up to be the strong arm of the Federal Reserve. It was set up around the same time. They knew that once they created the Federal Reserve, started taxing us, that if they did not have a national police, that people would be out of hand, and repel the tyranny. And so it was set up for that reason. There's a lot of information out there that J. Edgar Hoover was gay, that they had compromising pictures and information. There's an entire plethora of information about a thing called the Blue Suite at the hotel up there where Trump owns what used to be this hotel, that they had, like, crazy sex tapes that had been taped. They entrapped people. So the FBI is just as dirty as the CIA. So what's your second question?
So now that Kash Patel has been voted in as head of the FBI, who votes the head of the CIA in? And does anybody other than the United States have any say in it?
So in the past, I think there was a lot of outside input on who is going to be in the CIA, because again, I don't think in the past the CIA's ever worked for the president. That is not the case with Ratcliffe, and he will be voted on just like Kash was, for confirmation, and he was already confirmed, by the way. So as far as I know, he was Donald Trump's pick. That's not saying that there are things that happen behind the scenes that we don't know about. The whole conversation, with some credibility, that some people's vice presidents weren't necessarily their vice president pick, such as Trump with Pence, and that there was a deal that was made. So there are some of those things that happen behind the scenes. You don't find out about them for decades later when something, some email is found that's declassified or something like that. So I'm going on the assumption that Radcliffe was Trump's pick, and he's been confirmed, and he's going to do what Trump wants done with the CIA.
Okay, so final question, thank you for these, is who has the seniority between Kash Patel and Radcliffe if one of them believes the other one to be in error, or they clash on some project?
So they have nothing to do with each other. From the perspective that the FBI is like your MI5, and he reports directly to the Attorney General, Kash does, and the Attorney General reports to Trump. The CIA director oversight comes from the national security, the DNI position, and the national security advisor, and then Trump. So they have two completely separate chains of command. And that's the reason why they set up the position of the national, the director of intelligence, is so that they can deconflict the different, because all an intelligent assessment is an opinion. It is a fact-based opinion on what you think the facts actually mean. Now, obviously, if you're fudging the facts, it's not a fact-based, it's bullshit start to finish. So if and let's just take a terror cell that's both domestically and foreign. So you're going to have to collaborate between the CIA and the FBI. If the FBI said, I don't think there's a problem in the United States with that particular terror cell based on their assessment of their intelligence. If the CIA says, bullshit, I've got customs where they keep trying to get over into the United States, and yes, they may have been turned down at this customs place or visa place, the embassies, because the CIA basically controls them, and they try to get at this embassy, and this embassy, and so now they have tried over 20 times to get people in the United States. We really need to think about them coming over the border, and they may be here without you knowing about it. So those types of differences of intelligence assessments goes to the DNI, and the DNI then collaborates collates the differing opinions. And literally there will be, if there's 17 different agencies, there can be 17 different entities or entries into the estimate. And then they put a position at the end based on their small staff of what they think the 17 different assessments collate into a single one that's provided to the president. And so they have a liaison. So the CIA has a liaison in the headquarters on the 7th floor, and vice versa. So there is communication back and forth, but there's like no formal like interaction. It'd be literally like your MI6 and your MI5. You assume that they're communicating with each other, but one is internally focused and the other one is externally focused. And yes, some transnational threats will require the two of them to work together.
Okay, and how is the Supra?
It will be delivered tomorrow.
Oh, exciting. I can't wait.
I know. I will post a picture as soon as it gets here. All right, Joseph.
Hi, so Matt, you asked some fantastic questions. I had just a couple comments and then a question. So for Matt, you're wondering about 9/11. I can tell you that Citibank was financed from Iran-Contra money. Saudi arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi was taking weapons from Israel and selling them to Iran. That's how Citibank came into existence. If you read the 9/11 report, it's more than clear, they just ignored it for many years, that Citibank financed 9/11. Saudi Prince Al-Walid bin Talal financed 9/11 and probably masterminded it because he's a high-level CIA operative with connections to Trump, to Obama, Elon Musk, and so on. My question has to, and also another comment about J. Edgar Hoover. It's a pretty well-known fact that he was he had a homosexual lover, Clyde Tolson, who was his second in command at the FBI. So the question that I have has to do with USAID. So there's like three primary ways that the CIA keeps things secret. One is the most obvious one is the classification marking. Another thing is called compartmentalization, where they only give it to people, access to people who need to know, like on a need to know basis. And then the third is where my question comes in. Is it the USAID's function was their function to keep the existence of contracts and clients secret from the public? Because that's the third and most pernicious way that the CIA keeps things secret.
So all of USAID's contracts are supposed to be public information. You are supposed to be able to go on and look at all of because they're using government money. Not all of their money is government money, but when you use government money, there is a requirement for you to post and enter. And there are, to the extent that I've looked, tons in the government contract database that was led on behalf of USAID. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put something out in a little bit about one particular company and their use of that. But I do want to clarify something. The classification and compartmentalization is basically the same thing. So just for everybody's knowledge, the classification of confidential, secret, top secret, and then after top secret, SCI, you have a series of identifiers that are basically the read in people, which depict the compartmentalization of that higher classification. So, and I'm just going to throw this out. I don't know any of real examples as far as off the top of my head, but if you were working in an environment where you have a TSSCI clearance, and let's just say the project that you're working on is divided up into 5 things, they could literally just have the team that's working on one compartmentalized with their information as a -1, the second group as a -2. So the compartmentalization basically is integrated into the classification of the material that you're handling. That was not a real example, but I just wanted to articulate how that actually works. So anyway, anybody else got anything?
Colonel, can I jump in for a second?
Sure.
Hey, everybody. Fun Spaces here. Some good questions as always. Wanted to do a couple clarifications and elaborations. Joseph is correct about some of the Citibank financing, but that's not the origins of the bank. I'm a pretty good source on it since I worked there for a number of years. But when we've been going through the Skull and Bones series that the Colonel and I've been doing, there's a number of Citibank or Citibank of New York, which was the founder of it, going back more than a century. The bank's been around a very long time. It's been bailed out by the U.S. government on 6 or 7 different occasions, mostly for making really bad loans in Latin America. You've had people like the Whitney family, Rockefellers, many others been involved in Citibank. So you would find that when it became the entity known as Citibank, a lot of the preferred shareholders remained. And with most banks in America, the common shareholders don't have a whole lot of power over the bank. It's the preferred shareholders. They're non-voting shares, but that's with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to clarify that just a little bit. The other thing I wanted to add on to what the Colonel was saying about the FBI and CIA, and that was a great...
Guys, is anyone else having trouble hearing?
Joseph, if you are, you have to go over to Rumble. This happens all the time. They sabotage my space. So if you're having trouble with your volume, you have to go over to Rumble to listen. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Warhamster.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to speak more clearly. I am on a phone, so it's not the best audio. Colonel was talking about the question was about the FBI and the CIA, and I just wanted to elaborate on that just a little bit. When it comes to intelligence, because the FBI is part of the intelligence community, they still answer operationally to the DOJ, but the DNI can issue policy directives. They were very precise in the language when they created the DNI because of that apparent conflict. And I didn't have time to pull it up, but it's something worth going into. Just analyzing the language of that relationship, it gives you some insight. I think it's pretty fascinating. At the end of the day, they shouldn't have any relationship whatsoever because the CIA is not supposed to operate on the U.S. soil, but we know how that goes.
Yeah, I mean, if it was a legitimate organization, like I said in the scenario I gave, where you have transnational threats, you could see them collaborating with each other because they obviously could be trying to breach the United States. But that would be the extent, although we know that's not the extent.
Exactly. I mean, we can probably think of a few CIA domestic operations in the last 60 years, can't we?
A few? Yeah.
Couple famous ones. Can I make one last subject from about 20 minutes ago?
Sure.
Well, there's a talk about El Salvador and Bukele, and everyone's really happy because the crime rates in El Salvador have dropped down to, like the safest country in South America now in terms of murders and everything like that. Well, people forget, he's offered to, take prisoners from the United States, and that's great and fine and dandy. But Bukele did this by suspending the Constitution of El Salvador. And our friend Ron Partain asked me to go on a show more than a year ago just to talk about the ethics of suspending a Constitution and, what's the downside risk there. Well, this guy, the El Salvadoran, first of all, he promised to restore the Constitution within like a year or two. That hasn't happened. He was not allowed to run for re-election and consecutive, according to their Constitution. They can't run for president in consecutive terms. You've got to have someone else serve in between, according to their Constitution. Well, he got around that by having a Supreme Court that his party put in place that basically overruled the plain letter language of the Constitution. And there's a ton of more things he's done that really ought to scare the heck out of people, because this is not a great example. Yeah, he's a benign dictator, and sometimes a strong man is necessary to, take on some, very big problem. But what if you get a bad dictator, who will never give up power? And I don't like the fact that the U.S. is buddying up with him because of that thing. This is not a constitutional country anymore. It is a pure dictatorship, and he just happens to be one who's doing a heck of a lot of good right now. Because the world's not black and white. But I think El Salvador there's an issue. If his successor decides he's going to be a megalomaniac or whatever, and he's got all this constitutional, super constitutional power, it's a problem.
So you weren't there last night, but we basically had this exact same conversation at the pond last night. And my point has always been, and I keep coming back to the analogy that was driven into my head: when you're a commander in the military, you cannot have situational ethics. You can't say that based on this situation, you can't lie, but there's this other situation over here where you can lie and it's perfectly fine. There's no such thing as such situational ethics. There is also no such thing as adherence to the Constitution as long as we want it and it's doing what we want to have done. You either have a Constitution and you adhere to it 100% of the time, or you're not an advocate of a constitutional republic. You're just not. There's not situational constitutionality. And that conversation last night had to do with how you go about creating or using the Doge function. And I made the point that if an entity is not constitutional, it should not be at the federal government level, period. And I'm going to stick by that.
Well, yeah, that sounds like we're in a lot of agreement there. And we're actually going to do the fourth part of our series on these executive orders and do they supersede presidential authority according to the Constitution's original intent. as opposed to what we've seen has been practiced in common days. The last thing I wanted to say, and by the way, I think everything Doge is doing is within the Constitution. I do not think they've overstepped their bounds at all. The last thing I was going to say is I forget who asked the question earlier, but the fact about getting Brad Pitt to play. By the way, if it was 1970, early 1970s, I think a lot of us here might have been Democrats. I might be. The Republican Party, knowing what we know now, I think I might have a little bit easier time with their ethics. Thank goodness the Libertarian Party was founded in 1971.
All right, Moneypenny, go ahead.
So I don't know whether you've ever looked at it, but when WikiLeaks happened, obviously there were many stories that came out of this, and there was access to a lot of files. And obviously there's even some debate now about whether or not Edward Snowden comes back to the US and whether other whistleblowers, are allowed to have, free access. But I use the database from WikiLeaks a lot as part of my research investigations, but not a lot of people are aware that alongside it are wiki cables, which not many people look at.
Yeah.
And I've got them in front of me. Now, you were just talking about the different types of sensitivity classifications. So I've got them here, and handling restrictions. And I've just got a couple of questions. So on the wiki cables, we go from unclassified at the lowest up to secret / no foreign, NOFORN.
No foreign eyes.
No foreign, that's short for, is it? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then on handling restriction, you go from like XTIS, which is exclusive distribution only, down to US government only. And then you've got sensitive, limited official use, no foreign distribution, blah, blah, blah. What is Cherokee? Cherokee is a type of handling restriction on these documents.
I know that I've seen that. I'd have to go back and think about that.
It's so out of kilt with everything else, because you can work out other stuff like Lindis and Nodis and Stadis.
So let me, again, a lot of that has to, so if it was, do you have an example of it being used on a particular cable?
Well, I have about 10 million here.
No, but I mean one that actually has that on it.
I've got it in front of me. So yes.
What's the subject of it?
Message to President Sadat.
Okay.
Minutes, Bundy's report on Simon, talk with Matt Bundy. These are the subject matters. Instructions from Secretary, meeting with Dobryvin.
Okay, so that's McGeorge Bundy, which obviously you're talking about. And for those of you who don't know, these are diplomatic cables. They're messages. So they always refer to messages between diplomatic stations, like our embassies out in the field, and the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State or the President, as cables. That's just a leftover from a long time ago. So that could be an example of that special compartmentalized designator. So they will use like tribe names or letters or whatever, but that it could be what that is. That could be referring to people read in on a particular action. And that is only people that have that level of authorization or has been quote unquote read in are allowed to see that. So what would happen is when you go into the SCIF to look at material, you're going to be pulling off of those designated compartmentalization identifiers to get all of the information that you need to know about that particular operation.
That explains it, because they're really difficult to, a lot of them are just blocked completely, and a lot of them have got tags like Kissinger, OGen, OVIP, so they're very difficult to find ones that have got a lot of info in them. I just wondered why they're so high security. Yeah, thank you for that.
Because they're diplomatic cables and they're basically giving away the family jewels, if you will. So the only reason I know a lot of that is because of my job at the Pentagon. I know that when like the SecDef travels, you know, we were talking in this book here when Ford went out to out west during the middle of one of those family jewel exposure things, and they were talking about him being on an unclassified communications. Well, what William Perry, who was the SecDef back in the 1990s for Clinton, he actually patented the first ever classified at the top secret SCI level ability to do like satellite communications. So there, you can look at the phone on the pictures that they've already published of Hegseth as the Secretary of Defense. You can look in the one picture over his left-hand shoulder. There's a whole bunch of phones that are there. Those phones allow communication that you can't normally get. So they're like super, super secret classification. And there's an entire communication segment in the Pentagon and in the White House that's called cables. That's the name of their office. And what they do is they collate information based on tag words, which are operational. They change every day. And that's how they sort out all of the diplomatic cables going back and forth for particular operations. And the people that work in those areas are given, you know, on a daily basis what it is that they're going to call out of all of the communications. And so after you've worked in the, and so when they fly now, you can actually do secured communication through patching through the satellite connections, so they can have 24/7 now secured communications. And that obviously is very handy given the environment that they operate in. Because in the past, before they got that, and you remember the whole encryption, crypto AG that we've talked about a lot, that was not a mobile capability. It was encrypted, but it wasn't something, you couldn't take those devices and like stick them on an airplane and use them. Very interesting. Carrie, go ahead.
Way around it. I've found a way that I can read them that I don't think would be obvious to most people. So that's why I wondered how sensitive they are.
Yeah. Okay, Carrie, go ahead.
Hey, I just want to tease Brady and say that purity's a coffin. That's what we learned at Occupy Wall Street in the Bureau of Prisons, Federal Bureau of Prisons head can make all kinds of decisions about your life if you're in there. And the other thing is, I want to complain about Mike Benz. He was just on Glenn Greenwald, and he's becoming really famous now. Some go-to guy. It was so hard to listen to him. But anyway, he said that Samantha Power was on the National Security Advisor, blah, blah, for Biden.
She has served as the deputy, if I remember right, National Security Advisor.
Who?
Samantha Powers.
Oh, he said that. So his information was wrong.
I don't know. I'm saying if my memory serves me right that she was the deputy, but I may be thinking of someone else. Let me look it up real quick. She was the ambassador to the UN. Yeah. So it says here. Yeah, no, she only was Biden's USAID. She worked on the National Security Council for Obama, and she was there as like a human rights thing. Let's see.
So he's putting out disinformation.
I don't see anywhere on her profile that says that she did anything other than Biden, for Biden other than USAID, because she took that office on May 2021, and then she left when Trump took office. So don't know.
So he lied.
I'm not going to say that. I'm just saying that I don't see that. Yeah. Yeah. So here it says she was Obama's on his national security as the special assistant to the president for multilateral affairs and human rights. And then she was the U.S. ambassador to the UN. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm just missing it, but I don't see it. All right, who else we got? Anybody else? SR-71?
Thank you, Colonel. Just a couple of things. You did mention Seymour Hersh, and for those that that don't know about Seymour Hersh, he's also the one not only that reported on Watergate, but he also reported on the pipeline bombing. So you might find that interesting. But the other thing that was concerning me about USAID, I think this is the tip of the iceberg to a bigger pot of money, if you want to know the truth, in what's going on and why they're trying to protect it once they start digging into it. But I'm with War Hamster on this one, in where I'm concerned that it falls under the Department of State. And we know that the Department of State has its own skeletons that run very, very deep. So if we don't get rid of this thing, I'm really going to be mad.
So
Colonel.
So if you pay attention to the terminology, what Rubio announced is he has double-hatted himself as the USAID chief as well as the Secretary of State. So they are not embedding it in the Department of State, which, again, words matter. That's a very good thing. I was explaining last night that you can't just shut it down overnight. There is a process. They have over 10,000 people all over the world. And that's not even the contractors. That's their own people. You have to bring all of those people back home. And there is a lengthy process to schedule, because they're over there with their families. You've got to, you've got to pack your shit up. You've got to schedule shipping dates. You got to ship your car home. It is going to be a multi-month process, even if every one of them were told that they were to begin packing yesterday. It will be 6 months before you'll get them all back home, and that won't include their household goods. So there is going to be a very interesting, and what's going to be very interesting as far as I'm concerned is these countries are going to look around at the mass exodus of all of these people who probably they didn't even know was part of USAID. And they're just going to go, where'd all those Americans go? Because there's a lot of them that are appearing over there to look like they work for civilian companies when in fact they're working for USAID. So it's going to be very interesting. All along?
Yeah, Colonel, somebody mentioned Samantha Powers, and that just kind of reminded me that we always need to remember, if possible, her husband, Cass Sunstein.
Yep.
They're like a severe and savage and brutal power couple over at the institution known as Harvard University.
Yep.
And it's often forgotten that that Cass Sunstein proposed something called cognitive infiltration when he was working, I believe it was in the Obama White House or in the State Department. And what he meant by that is it was a defense of the U.S. government essentially intervening in, online discussions and in journalism in order to constantly, deliberately mislead online discussions about, for example, 9/11, and that this would be the deliberate policy of the U.S. government. So when we think about, the overwhelming power of the state in deregulating media, so that essentially allows 5 corporations to control 90% of media. When we think about of their increasing regulation of the internet, so that algorithms can basically determine that some speech reaches virtually nobody. And also when we add on to that the fact that the state under Cass Sunstein had the power to go in using U.S. taxpayer money to go in and distort and manipulate online discussions as deliberate policy of the state. It's a pretty beyond Orwellian situation here, and it's important to remember that these folks are married, and
yeah, wouldn't you love to listen to that pillow talk? Yeah, that's a good point, and thank you for bringing that up. Southern Belle?
I'm trying to understand something. There was an interview with Zelensky saying he never received a big chunk of money from us. He said, no, we never got those funds. Because Biden was like desperate trying to get funds out during his presidency. It was like an insane kind of sense of urgency compared to everything else he did. It was like what totally focused him, if anything. Where was this money going?
So again, I've made this point. There is a common misunderstanding of how aid of any kind, any of this money works. I would venture to say, and this would be a great exercise to be able to video this, is to ask people on the street how they think whether it's USAID or foreign aid or the weapons, whatever it is. So the combination of all of the different categories of money that has been sent to Ukraine, you can, basically there's been military foreign aid, there's been State Department foreign aid, there's been USAID foreign aid, there's been National Endowment for Democracy foreign aid. All of those are different pots of the collective money. So not a penny of that money is actually money. There's no one, except for maybe Obama when he put the cash on the pallet and flew it to Iran. There's no actual money going to Ukraine. None. That aid is generally line itemed to do something. And generally the things that it does, whether it's like military aid, buys helicopters, buys bullets, buys, and we've basically even to this point purchased weapons from NATO countries in order to supply them to Ukraine. So that's all done with a contract. There's a whole bunch of people in America that got rich off of the Ukraine quote unquote war. And the aid that is sent over there is generally done through some U.S. company. So when I looked into the comments that they were basically paying their pension fund, what they were actually doing was they paid a third party, because again, all of this money has to go into a defense or not a defense, but a government contracting system. They were actually paying, there's some special name for a contract that allows the third party to administer it. And I found that in the Battelle dig that I did. A lot of these large, and I'm going to find it in this one that I'm doing right now, I know, because it's very large. They basically get what is called, the company that Petraeus opened did this too. They give them a contract, and let's just say the contract is $10 million. The contract is for them to then go out and do something that you can't do with a direct contract from the federal government. So if they can't actually pass cash, they'll get an intermediary person to do that for them, but they can take a cut of the money. And when you're talking, $100 billion, that cut becomes very significant. And that's just like when we did the covert weapons transactions, where we were using Israel to sell missiles to Iran. Well, Israel didn't do that for their health. They got a huge chunk of that money. The same thing with the using Israel for a cutout for the weapons that were being sent to Angola. And there we not only went through Israel, but we also went through South Africa. Everybody has their hand in the cookie jar. So at the end of the day, when it goes on, as long as this has, there's going to be a significant chunk of the money that somebody's going to say is quote unquote missing, but it's not missing. All you have to do is follow the money in those accounting systems, and you're going to find out exactly where it went.
Wow. Well, Schumer and Jeffries are freaking out. They're doing everything to get in front of a camera to go after Elon, looking at Treasury in USA. They're like freaking out.
Yeah, because they're going to be at the other end of that. And that's why I keep making the comment, these people that are doing great work in saying, 50,000 condoms went to Serbia. I don't give a shit. I want to know what company in the United States got the contract to give them to Serbia, because it didn't go directly to Serbia. We didn't buy condoms. Hold on.
They don't want you to know they don't want you to know
Joseph,
who the client is.
Joseph, we take turns here. Sorry, I know you're new. But that money did not go directly to Serbia. They'd have been lucky if they got the condoms. But
because there's another order for 176 million boxes of condoms. And
yeah.
I'm like, what?
Yeah.
For the Middle East?
Yeah, exactly.
They're all Magnum.
Yeah.
Size.
All right. So, Yvonne, go ahead.
I just wanted to chime in because I was listening to you talk about Ukraine. I just heard a story, I think it was yesterday. I guess somebody interviewed him. I can't remember who it was. It's Reuters. Anyways, he said something about, I guess they got 200 billion. I'm talking about Zelensky. He was saying in this interview they got 200 billion, but out of that 200 billion, they personally, Ukraine only got 76. And then I also heard another story, like what you were saying in regards to the monies. I heard that, all of the propaganda, political news reporters that are the people who report there in Ukraine, they were Trump basically shut them off, and so they're crying and they're moaning, and they're asking for donations from the people of Ukraine because they've been shut down. So I know some of those funds went into their propaganda fake news outlets.
Yeah. And I mean, because they shut down all of the opposing press in Ukraine. And again, that's something that's a tell here, guys. So Ukraine, we're told, is a democracy, but they have no free press. They don't even really have a president because his term expired. So he is, in fact, a dictator at this point. But what's really interesting is Venezuela has not only free press, but the press has been paid by the CIA to report bad shit about Chavez and Maduro. And the same thing happened with Allende. We were told he was a communist, and yet he had free press. As a matter of fact, he had such free press that the guy that was reporting all the bad shit was on the payroll of the CIA. And so it's a tell when you go and you know what to look at in these countries in order to determine what the real truth is. Joseph, go ahead. Joseph?
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So yeah, I was just gonna, I'm trying to wrap my head around like what the sleight of hand is. How they're tricking people to think that this is actually going towards condoms in Gaza, Serbia, wherever, or is it just by these misleading how they label it? Like
no, they will actually give them condoms, but the condoms cost 50 cents. So
whoever the contractor is,
yes,
sells that and makes the money.
Yes.
Wow.
And
find out who the
that's what I keep saying. I've been screaming that.
Confused, but now I get it 100%.
Yeah. So whoever is getting all of the USAID tens and hundreds of billions of dollars every year is the one that is making the money. And as a matter of fact, just because we've covered this so often, like in Afghanistan back in the 80s with the Mujahideen and the northern warlords and all that other crap when Russia was there. What the CIA did was they went to Congress and they said, hey, we need $100 million. And I mean, it ended up being tons more. I'm just pulling that number out. For weapons to give to the Mujahideen, and we're going to give it through the ISI, which is the Pakistani intelligence counterpart to the CIA. So we're going to give them $100 million. Then they're going to funnel it into Afghanistan to buy weapons. Well, what happened was, of course, ISI takes their cut, and then they went and bought Bulgarian Soviet Union weapons that were rusted. Half of them didn't work. They were pieces of shit. And they gave them to the Afghanis and pocketed the rest of the money. So every step of the way, somebody's making a chunk of change. And they eventually get something. It's just not what they think. And so chances are they're getting condoms for 50 cents from China with holes in them. And those are going to be stacked up in some, aid warehouse that we're probably paying somebody else's family who's married to somebody over in a country in Serbia, $1 billion for the 5-year rental of the warehouse to put all of the unused holy condoms in. And I'm not making this up. This actually happens. So there was a guy that was married to a Jordanian, and the Jordan government helped work a weapons contract, and you had to have a Jordan company in order to get this particular contract. And so the Jordanian, the American that was married to the Jordanian, that Jordanian family set up the company, and then they were giving money as a contract to that company under a USAID program. And so basically that money was coming back to America through the American spouse, but they registered the family as owning it because he was married to a Jordanian. And they actually look for people like this, by the way, to be able to do this covertly. And so then the person who gets that contract knows by getting that contract what the deal is ahead of time. Here's the part that you get to keep, that you're going to have to give us this amount, and you need to send this amount to this amount. And by the way that was being done when Nugent Hand Bank from 72 to the 90s, and when BCCI was around, is in order to get these contracts and this money, you had to have a bank account at the CIA's bank. So as soon as you deposited the money, they took their shit out. Money Penny?
Wow.
I've just sent you something on your DM. Do you know, I've just been into one of those databases that I use when I was tracking down MH370. I found all the payments that were from the Kuala Lumpur, capital of Malaysian office, to Lockheed Martin, Northern Gunrock, all those types of people, when Israel were basically having access to a huge amount of money from a grant. That they had a restriction that they had to send the money back to the contractors. It was clearly money laundering at a huge amount. Now, if you've seen that Lev Parnas documentary, I don't know if anybody's seen it. It's on my profile, a reference to it, because it is bloody funny. I'm sorry, but it is hysterically funny and very serious at the same time. It shows you how the money's moving in and out and around Ukraine, and the connection, obviously, with what was going on with Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and their investments in pandemic insurance companies and others, none of which is conspiratorial. It is all fact, and it is all available and on my profile. And a lot of the money that is being paid over to Zelensky at the moment, that is not getting there, obviously goes to contractors in the same way that Israel was with MH370. This is not a coincidence. I could do whole spaces on the amount of money moving around, because money is my thing. But I will say that if you want access and you have time on your hands and you want to put a great big whiteboard on your wall and a tree diagram that shows you where money from the US actually really goes, you can work it out. It's quite easy. And on the DM I've sent to you, Colonel, my worry is that yesterday, 1.8 million went out on US aid yesterday. Now, that could probably be, and it is to me, quite a shock. Since midday yesterday, our time, US aid was shut down, and then Rubio was appointed, and it was brought back up under the State Department. But at any of that point, when people were talking about US aid, did anybody look at the fact that contracts were going out for millions of dollars from and to US aid and their various contractors?
So one of them that I found yesterday when I was looking into this one company that was sent out yesterday actually was for transportation. So I'm going to assume that that money was already set aside to start shipping household goods. I don't know that for a fact because I've not looked into who the contract went to, but I did see one of them. And I forget, I was looking, I still have the tab open, but I don't know which website it was on. But anyway, yes, I'm aware of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But this particular one was for transportation, and I could legitimately say that's probably what that is in order to effect their return. But again, without tracking down the actual company, I'd have to say that is odd. And thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, it's 1.8 million going to AT&T, going to, support for professional service contracts, technology, operation of miscellaneous buildings. Madagascar, for some reason, seems to be getting a lot of money. IT, telecom business. I mean, all this is USAID stuff, and it is literally millions that went out yesterday.
So there may be a penalty for canceling their cell phones. That's a thing too. If you're on a contract, as you well know, if you cancel early, there are penalty clauses, especially when you're dealing with the military or the government. I had them. I had a cell phone service through the government that was shitty, and it was AT&T, by the way. And based on my travel, half the time I didn't have cell service, and I was using my Verizon personal cell. So I used that as justification to transfer my business account over to Verizon, because you had to have that kind of data in order to justify, because we didn't use as a preferred contractor Verizon. And when I did that, I had to pay the penalty to get out of the contract because they let those contracts on the 1st of October of every year. So there would be contractual penalty payments. Again, I think it's way too soon for that to be the legitimate reason, but we'll have to keep in mind that extracting ourselves out of these arrangements is going to cost us some money, but then there will be no perpetual line item to keep paying after that. But good on you for keeping track of that.
CGI Federal, CGI Federal Inc. What exactly is that?
I don't know. I've never heard of it.
It's the parent business of USAID and pretty much every other government department by the looks of it.
CGI what?
CGI Federal Inc.
That may be one of those overarching third parties that they use. Consultants to Government and Industry Incorporated is a Canadian multinational information technology consulting and software in Montreal. I recognize their logo. So I've looked these guys up. I've been on this web page before because some of the hyperlinks are already clicked. I'd have to go back and figure out where I saw them at. Surely they're in one of my books.
Yeah, they get an awful lot of money, whoever they are.
Oh, a lot of them are.
I recognize them. They're the ones, they developed the healthcare.gov website that crashed the first day.
They're Canadian. Now, given the Canadian talks yesterday, sorry, with Trisha, isn't that funny?
Yeah, it says here that they also were given a big contract to do Army training elements for the Deputy Chief of Staff for Intel, which is their G2, and for their TRADOC, which is their Training and Doctrine Command Center. So they've gotten lots of government contracts.
They have a location in Fairfax, Virginia. I know who they are.
Yeah, and then it talks about the whole marketplace .gov and what a goat rope that was. Yeah, it says they have contracts for visa processing with Defense Information Services Agency. Yeah, they got a lot of U.S. contracts, that's for sure.
Do you know what's interesting? It's too diverse to be one company. They're a pass-through. They've got to be a pass-through. Think about it. Companies don't have contracts across like that. There has to be another something there.
You mean subsidiaries?
Yeah, they're too diverse. Too many things. That's hard to do as a company.
Yeah, that's exactly why I was asking, because all have got them, and they're not all the same sector.
Well, here it says they have a subsidiary called CGI Federal, and CGI Federal is a wholly owned subsidiary that partners with U.S. federal agencies to provide IT services in defense, diplomacy, intelligence, healthcare, environment, homeland security, justice, treasury. So their annual revenue exceeds $1 billion for just that one segment. And it is the CGI Federal that is located in Arlington.
Yeah, they say they have over 100 offices, 25,000 professionals.
Yeah.
Wow.
And nobody's heard of them. This is sounding really strange.
But that's what I was saying about Patel when I came across Patel. I mean, they're one of the single largest contractors of the entire federal government across all things, Homeland Security, Department of Defense, all of them. And no one's ever heard of them. And they maintain the bioweapons labs. How do we not know who they are? Everybody got on to Metabiota and all that other crap because it was Hunter Biden, while Battelle is like the big elephant in the room no one ever talked about. I was dumbfounded when I found that. So there's a lot of these hiding in plain sight kind of things. Yeah. All right. So we're going to go. We're a little bit over. Thank you guys. What a wonderful space it's been today. Joseph, thank you for the crash in the party. Glad to have you here. Excellent contributions. And thank everybody else that comes in on a regular basis. I love you guys all. So tomorrow we're going to be sharing pictures of a really cool car, and I couldn't be more excited about that. So thanks for being here. I will see you guys tomorrow. Take care. All right, back over to you guys on Rumble. What do we got here? Then the condoms end up in the brothels. Oh, damn. Caravaggio, I should have read that one. Sorry. I love that comment. That's absolutely true, too, right? They are used in the blackmail operations where we entrap people. Let's see. This is why I believe the company is actually the okay. Love you. I love you too. What is your Laramie? Coco? All right. Private investor from the U.S. subsidies, multinational. Yep. All right. Okay. So I think we got everybody's. The creation of a security force under the control of the states to monitor the activities of the federal government and enforce the Constitution. Well, in reality, that is very close to what Florida just did in creating their own National Guard, not associated with the Federal National Guard, to protect its citizens. So could be a thing. All right. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Appreciate it. See you tomorrow.